Alright, I'm cheating a little bit here. This is about a week later. I've already got the main guts in there. I'm going to post a bunch of videos on each of the steps for getting the crankshaft on the front end. Anyway, I'm putting this at the front of the, cleaning the block out and also painting it, so this does have the AMC blue on it. I just want to do a quick intro before I post this video. That it's kind of longer than I was expecting. I didn't want to break up the cleaning, the prep, the taping, and the painting, so I just want to make that all one video. Sorry about that, it's like 32 minutes. Anyway, if you want to jump to the painting, just go to about minute 20, minute 21, somewhere there. That's where I actually get to painting. Although I did find a couple interesting things as I was prepping about using rubber cement for the core plugs to protect them. I saw a couple different options with people taping, and I was expecting to use a razor blade, but just rubbing something on the edge there worked out really well. Anyway, go ahead and take a look. Oh, and I forgot that what a big part of this is going to be also just going through the steps of the KBS motor coder kit. This is not an advertisement for KBS motor coder. They didn't sponsor this at all. I just decided to buy it and wanted to try it out. The degreaser and the cleaner and also the rust inhibitor, as well as the paint. Well, the paint was the main thing I was interested in. So a couple of recommendations as I go through each of those particular steps. There's a lot of different AMC blue painting options. I really liked this one here. This came out really nicely, so I would recommend KBS. But I think Seymour has one, a spray can, Seymour, I think. Eastwood, I think they also have some AMC blue paint. So there's a bunch of different options for it. This is just the one that I tried. So I got a set of little brushes to get into some of the small passages. I guess I should have gotten longer handles. I didn't even think about that, but I'll get it in there as much as I can. I'm going to put a little degreaser on the outside just to clean it up just a tiny bit more. I'm going to be careful, try not to get any on the inside of the doors and the rest of the engine, just as a kind of a real quick final flush. So I wiped down the cylinder walls, and I wiped down, made sure WD-40 I sprayed into the journals down below, and got into all those spots, because just a couple of minutes after I finished washing everything, it already started flash rusting a bit. You can kind of see it on the block there. Already a little bit of orange here and there. I'm going to hit that with some rust inhibitor in a second from the KBS motor coater kit. But everything is nicely coated now, and I'm just taping off the edges here, because I'm going to put the head on here and paint all of that together. But I just want to get a good seal on this. I saw somebody doing this, and this actually works pretty well, just using something like a screwdriver to cut the paint. Rather than using a razor blade, this cuts it right on when you have a sharp edge. Makes it super easy. Yep. Yeah, that's definitely the way to go for some of these sharp edges. Super crisp. Yeah, it's almost cutting it on its own right there. Oh, that works great. Going to use some, and this is what the machine shop said to use. So I'm going to use some of this Permatex Aviation. There's another one right up above, and I believe these are 3/8. This is a 5/16 hex socket, but they're all three the same. There's one here right above the oil filter plug-in. There's one at the front right above the cam bearings. It gets covered up by the timing cover. And there's one in the back here as well. It is right over here. So I had taken those out so that I could flush out through the oil gallery. So the powder coating plug set's going to work well for some of these other random holes, depending on what order you're doing this in. So I'm about getting ready to paint, and I do not want to paint the brass core plugs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put some rubber cement in each of them to cover them up. I've already tried it a little bit, and it just peels right out, so that should be a good seal, and just super easy to put some in there. Be a lot easier than trying to tape off each of those round pieces on the insert. I think if I just put that there and just peel out the rubber cement, that should work out fine. Nice liberal coating in there. I don't care about the outside edge. If I brush up around the edges, that should work. So, and these are the things that they don't tell you about. When I watched a bunch of videos on engine painting and preparation, that sort of thing. The water pump goes right here. The timing cover goes around here. You see the outline of right there. And I'll show all this after I get done painting. and there's this like sort of line here. I'm sure the gasket doesn't come all the way out because that's really where you want to put it, the gasket. You can see there's a hole right there. That's one of the holes where the gasket, where that goes through the cover. So the cover goes all right here, and then the gasket goes right around that, and it goes all the way to the bottom. Again, I'll show this when I get it all painted and done. But there's another area up in here that's kind of weird. I'm not sure if that's going to show. And there's some space between the timing cover and the water pump there. I'm not sure exactly, and I don't want to paint any of the gasket surfaces. So I'm going to go ahead and just paint this, paint the main sides and everything, and then do some touch up once I get some things together if I need to coat any more with paint. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. So I got the whole thing on the top all taped off. I got everything on this side all done. And then also this side is pretty well done. And I got the rubber cement and all these. It's a little tacky, but that'll dry. Hopefully that'll work out. And then, yep, I'm going to go ahead and clean off the head in the same way. I'm going to clean the whole thing, put the head on just sort of temporarily, and then blast the whole thing with the KBS rust blast right here. That's kind of why I spent a little bit more time covering up the head. I'm going to actually put the head on there, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other side of the head, so there's a nice seal and none of this stuff or any of the water rinse that comes with it gets in between and gets into the engine at all. So that sort of took me a little bit longer to do it this way, and I'm sure this step, I don't know, I didn't see anybody else who didn't have a big old kit use a rust converter or rust etching. So I don't know, maybe it's overkill, but I'm going to go ahead and do this step because that's what they recommend and that's what the kit came with. And then I'm going to paint it all together. So I'll get to that. Trying to keep the inside oiled up so that there isn't any flash rust, and then the outside clean from all the oil. That was a big pain in the butt. Right after cleaning it, I was feeling a little paranoid about flash rust coming in on the bores, so I immediately started oiling everything up. But what happened was when I was trying to coat the inside pretty carefully, I was getting a fair amount on the edges, and I'll show that a little bit more in a little bit. But I was getting some creep of the oil coming along these edges here. And it was coming around, and it was coming around to the part that I already cleaned. And so I was turning the motor over, and also there was getting a couple drips of oil here and there. And so after spending all the time cleaning the outside, having to clean that again, and especially this is really porous, really rough surface. You know, I'd much rather have it cleaned with a brush and soap and water and some of the degreaser than if you wipe a paper towel even with acetone. It seems to kind of get it, but I feel like there's going to be some oil and stuff sitting in there. So just went back and forth a little bit there. I think what I should have done is what I ended up doing with the head, and I'll show that in a minute. But down here you can kind of see, you can see where the oil came through here, a little bit there, a little bit there. So I need to clean that up pretty well. I might put some water on it now that I have all the surfaces taped off. I might put some water on it with some degreaser and then hit it with some acetone again. But I think for the most part, everything is pretty well taped down. So I watched a bunch of videos on people painting the blocks and painting their engines and things like that. And they just didn't talk about some of the details. They basically just said, oh yeah, just tape everything off and then you just kind of paint it. And not really much conversation about having to deal with the flash rust and how to best go about that. Or painting the back of the engine. I think actually the back of the engine, where I can't easily get to the back of the block here, I'm going to touch up paint because that's all covered by the transmission and the transmission shroud anyways. I will paint up there, but I'm not going to worry about trying to tape all that off with it being on the stand. So for the head here, I think the process worked a lot better. And here's what I did. I essentially just cleaned it off, used the degreaser and everything, and I quickly blew it off with air And I went around and dried everything off with a couple of dry paper towels and kept blowing it out, all the passages with the air, and that worked out pretty well. And then I immediately didn't worry about oiling too much. And I just went and I taped up these edges, and it didn't take very long just to do some quick taping of the edges. And then because there was no oil on those edges are now safe from any flash rust. Then I went in and I greased up and lubed up and just put a nice little coat of oil on the inside. And that worked out, I think, a lot better than trying to oil it first and then avoid the drips of the oil getting on the spots. Because now I know these surfaces right here, they're really clean. The tape adhered to it really well. You can kind of see again, there's a couple of tiny spots, but I can just hit that with sandpaper if I get paint on them. But super clean, again, just using, actually I just used my pick and I just rolled it over the edge there. And you do that 3 or 4 times just real quickly across the edge and it cuts it. And also for getting the oil in there, WD-40, if you try to do a spray can, it's going to get all over the place and it's going to mess it up. So I actually just used a toothbrush. I didn't want to use anything with any metal or anything like that, just in case some bristles came off or whatever. And I just went in and I just did kind of a quick, dipped it in some oil and rubbed it around in there. And that worked out great. For the valve guides, I just put on some oil. Actually, I just used this. I put on some oil on here and I just bobbed it up and down just to grease up the inside of the valve guides. And it came out great. And then there's the top there, same thing. I just put tape on it real quickly, cut those edges, and rubbed the toothbrush with the oil around some of those areas just to make sure that it wouldn't flash rust. So I could control it much, much better, a lot easier. Then the last thing, you can even see a little flash rust right in there. So a little orange, right where the spark plug holes are. So that's the last part that I need to cover up, and I wasn't sure exactly how to do it. And I thought, well, maybe I have one of these plastic washers. Maybe one of those would be a good fit in there, and I couldn't find a good fit in there. And then I took a look at some other washers I have, these 5/16, and bingo, it's absolutely perfect. It fits right in there, it's perfect. And then I wanted to seal it up, so I tried just putting some tape around it. And it actually is a nice little press fit in there. So if I put any more degreaser on there, in the KBS motor coater kit, it comes with that rust inhibitor. And then when I put some of that in there, I didn't want it to go down into the spark plug hole and then get all over the inside of the head. So this should cover up real nicely. So here I just wrap this up with tape and put it down in there. And it just press fits right in there, and that's a perfect little seal. I don't think any water will even get by there. So I just have to do that, and then I'm all set. All right, here it is with all together. I went ahead and put the head on because I want to paint it all together. Kind of want to know where the paint lines are, and also then that fully seals up the bottom of the head and the top of the block from getting any paint, any water, anything, because I'm going to use the rust inhibitor. So I'll just spray that on there a little bit as you're supposed to. Leave it on for half an hour, then rinse it off. I have everything pretty well sealed up here, so there shouldn't be any issues with any water getting in there. And then I dry it all off, then I can get straight to painting. Now I'm going to spray it with some Rust Blast. Just squirt it on there and leave it for about 30 minutes. Make sure you keep it damp so that if it gets white and chalky, you need to re-wet it. Just have to keep a little bit of watch on it if you want to really keep that wet surface. You can see there around the little flat areas, it's getting a little white and a little chalky. just to make sure it's dry, I think I'm going to go ahead and hit it with my heat gun. And there's tape around there and stuff like that, so I'm going to try to be really careful about it so I don't melt the tape or the glue that's on the tape. But hopefully that'll really just accelerate the drying. On Uncle Tony's garage, he hit it with a propane flame, and that dried it out and may have even burned off a little bit of oil that may have been embedded inside the casting. He had it totally stripped down. I have the core plugs in here and the tape and everything else, so I can't hit it with that, but I can at least hit a little bit with this and try to accelerate the drying process so I can get some paint on it tonight. The heat gun worked out really well. I mean, I suppose you could leave it for a while, but I don't want more rust to get on there, so I just soon dry it off as quickly as possible and then get to painting. So here's the motor coater, AMC blue. We're going to go ahead and put that on. And with the surface there, I'm kind of glad I'm going to be able to work in it a little bit with a brush as opposed to a spray can, although it does come in a spray can as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put on a really light coat initially just to get it set, and then do a couple more coats. Hopefully I have enough there. I used probably about 2/3 of it or so. Probably too much. I had way too much in my spray can when I did the oil pan cover and the valve cover. And again, that video is also posted. Maybe I'll do a link to it on this video here to how I painted that with the spray. And this top part's gonna be the hardest part. The casting is really rough. And got these little areas to get it into. Hopefully it'll be a little easier after this. I'm really trying to put on a thin coat, but up here, if you don't really work it in there, it's not getting into the little pores. I was messing around with the intake and exhaust gaskets, and you can't even see the exhaust gasket goes right along there, so you can't see any of these areas, but I'm going to get paint on them nonetheless just to make sure everything is nice and sealed. This definitely takes a while getting it in there. Rattle can would be a hell of a lot faster. But I do feel like it's getting worked in a lot better. Now the way to do it is probably, and I thought about this, but I'd have to buy a can of this rattle can, is to do a light coat like this with a brush and then rattle can it on. You get a little smoother surface probably on your final coat, and you make sure it gets worked in, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. Who knows, maybe I'll end up doing that, I don't know. This is, feels like I'm barely using any at all out of the can here. Probably do a couple motors with this, just this little pint, little half pint. No, it's 1 pint. I think they only come in, if you buy part of the kit, it only comes as a pint, I believe, this size. And I looked, if you buy just the paint itself, it only comes as a quart. I didn't see it listed as in a pint sized. I think the rattle can was what, like 26 bucks or something. And this pint was like 30 by itself. Part of the kit, it's 54. I think that's what I paid for it. I think I bought it on Amazon, but you can buy it directly from KBS as well. It's funny, it says this is self-leveling. I think just as a function of how rough this surface is, you can't help but to settle out. You do have to keep the coats kind of thin. And it's easy to miss a spot because you have to really work it in there. I think what I'm going to do is when I get this all finished up and on the hoist, I'll have this spun around and I will put a coat of paint on the back here before I put the flywheel on. I think that's what I'm going to do here instead of trying to get in all those little nooks and crannies. Ooh, all these little areas are a lot of fun. Alright, now I know why people rattle can. So I'm just going to tell myself that this is going to adhere a lot better. I gotta tell you, these little handheld with the magnetic ends shop lights work great. Highly recommend something like this. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this coat. I only used, wow, I mean, not even maybe a tenth of this can. So this can will go a long way, this little pint, a very long way. I'll do a second coat. It says to do it within 30 minutes, or it's actually on the sheet here. It says to do it within 30, in most cases, a single coat of motor coater will cover completely with full color depth. If desired, a second coat may be applied within 30 minutes or after 7 days. That's interesting. So I can either do this again, or I feel like it's kind of sticky on it. As in, it's every time I put a brush on it, it's probably adding some brush strokes because the previous coat isn't dry. I'm probably just going to let this cure, work on some random stuff, and then come back and give it another coat. Because I can see some areas where it's a little thin. All right, the block is all done. I got one coat on there, and I think what I'm going to do is there's going to be a couple places here and there when I get it all back together. I know I'm going to have to touch up paint. There's a couple areas. Like some of this is sticking out here, a little bit here with the block. That's a blue tape right there if you can't see it. But it came out pretty nicely. Again, I only did one coat on there. The stuff is really, really thick. I'm going to go ahead probably, and after I get it all together, when I touch up, I'm just going to go ahead and wait for a second coat to do that. I probably won't do a full second coat, but there are a couple places I'm sure that I missed, especially underneath. I found a couple like underneath some of those bolt hole areas. But I love the color. I went ahead and put the top on there, the valve cover. I have another video where I showed how I painted that along with the oil pan. And I sprayed that one, and this one I obviously used the brush. A couple of the things, just to recap on what I would do a little bit differently the next time, is that as soon as I clean anything off, because I did this with the head, I think it makes sense to just to wipe down any surface, any kind of rubbing surface, like the cam bearings, certainly the valve seats, and the valve guide areas. I would wipe those down and then go ahead and just tape up the gasket surfaces, like inside here where the head comes together, obviously the top of the head, and then underneath as well. And then go ahead and paint it from there. I put too much oil everywhere. I was really afraid that I was going to get a lot of flash rust. And then I had to clean a couple of times because these edges here, I think I mentioned this before, get oil on the edges there right next to the place where it's supposed to be really clean. So this is all clean, and then the surface is there, the surface on the top, that's supposed to be totally clean as well. Anyway, so I would tape up. So I would do the oil first. I would do the wipe on oil and be pretty conservative about it and try not to get it everywhere. Don't put it on the gasket surfaces. Then tape up the gasket surfaces so that you're putting tape on all the surfaces that you think might rust, but that's going to protect it from rusting. And then you have still a nice clean edge. Anyway, it just took a little bit of extra work. I had to clean those corners a couple of times. And then also with this rust blast, it leaves that kind of a white. Actually, it's a little bit powdery in a way. So what I would recommend is, they say just put it on there, leave it for 30 minutes, keep a wet surface to it, which I did. And then I rinsed it off, and then sort of the white powder came through a little bit. So probably what I would do next time is, as I'm rinsing it, take that scrub brush I have and just give it kind of a light scrubbing to try to get off some of that white stuff, that white powder, as part of the final rinse. But yep, came out fantastic. Spark plug hole covers, those worked out great. And now on to the rest of the rebuild.